In the 1950s, the most powerful force in wrestling wasn't some giant holding a championship belt. It was a secret group of promoters called the National Wrestling Alliance, and they were completely in control. They had an absolute stranglehold on the entire industry, from New York to Honolulu, a massive empire built on secret deals. They seemed untouchable. They were a cartel that decided who became a star, who made money, and who got thrown out of the business forever. But what nobody knew was that the United States Department of Justice was about to attack. The DOJ declared the NWA an illegal monopoly and was building a case to bring the whole thing crashing down. This wasn't about fines. The government was threatening to destroy the entire organization. This is the story of the secret legal war that saved wrestling's most powerful cartel, only to, believe it or not, lead to its ultimate destruction. To understand how big of a threat this was, you have to realize the insane power the National Wrestling Alliance had. Formed in 1948, the NWA brought all the small wrestling companies under one roof to recognize one world champion and, most importantly, protect each other's territory. But it quickly became something way more powerful. By the 50s, the NWA was the only game in town. It controlled pretty much every single wrestling territory in North America. The NWA's power was built on two things that were brutally effective. First was territorial control. Think of it like this. The country was carved up, and each major city was given to one NWA promoter. Only that promoter could run shows there. If anyone else even tried to run a show in their city, they would face the wrath of the entire organization. These weren't legal contracts. It was all based on handshake deals with terrifying consequences. The second, and maybe the scariest, was the blacklist. This was the NWA's ultimate weapon. If a wrestler asked for too much money, or, even worse, worked for a non-NWA promoter, they were blacklisted. A suspension in one territory meant a suspension everywhere. Their career was instantly over. This gave the NWA a chokehold on talent, starving any potential competition and forcing every wrestler to do exactly what they were told. Their control was so complete that they even had state athletic commissions, the groups meant to regulate them, in their pockets. These commissions would mysteriously refuse to give licenses to new promoters, making sure only NWA-approved people could get in the business. They'd even block other promoters from the best arenas, leaving them to run shows in tiny high school gyms. It was a perfect system that made them millions and crushed anyone who got in their way. From the outside, it was wrestling's golden age. From the inside, it was a fortress. But by 1955, some brave people were starting to fight back. Every empire, no matter how strong, eventually starts to crack. And for the NWA, those cracks were people who had been burned by the Alliance's insane tactics. By 1955, their complaints were so loud they reached the one organization the NWA couldn't bully, the U.S. Department of Justice. One of the key witnesses was a promoter from Los Angeles named Johnny Doyle. After he quit the NWA, Doyle told the government everything about how the Alliance strangled its competition. Another huge voice was the legendary wrestler Stanislaus Zbyszko. He was a respected veteran who hated the NWA's methods, and he gave the government's case even more credibility. This wasn't just random complaining. This was real evidence from insiders. The fuse was lit. The man the DOJ sent to investigate was Stanley Disney, and he started building a massive case against the NWA, piece by piece. By June 1955, he was going after the most powerful man in wrestling, NWA President Sam Muchnick. Muchnick was the kingpin of the NWA. He was smart, respected, and incredibly connected. When the federal government started investigating him, he was in an impossible spot. He was facing a federal takedown. The memo Stanley Disney wrote was absolutely insane. He laid out the entire conspiracy, explaining how 38 bookers were controlling specific territories, price fixing, and systematic blacklisting. The government saw the NWA not as a sports league, but as a criminal enterprise. And they wanted to completely dismantle the NWA's entire operation. The organization's very existence was on the line. Through all this, Sam Muchnick had one gigantic fear, the one secret everyone in wrestling knew but never ever said out loud. He was terrified that a public trial would force him to admit, under oath, that wrestling was scripted, not a real sport. Muchnick believed that pulling back the curtain would demoralize the fans and sink the industry. He wasn't just trying to save his organization, he was trying to save the illusion that all of wrestling was built on. Facing a federal case that could expose wrestling's biggest secret, Sam Muchnick had a choice. He could fight the government in court and risk destroying the entire industry, or he could negotiate. Muchnick, the ultimate politician, chose to fight a quiet war, not in the news, but in the halls of power in Washington, D.C. This is where you see how powerful Muchnick really was. He had deep political connections, like his friend, Congressman Mel Price. Using these connections, Muchnick did something incredible. He got the Department of Justice to sit down and make a deal. Instead of a public trial, the future of wrestling would be decided through secret negotiations. The goal was to get a consent decree. A consent decree is basically a settlement that ends a lawsuit without anyone admitting they were guilty. It would let the NWA avoid a trial and, most importantly, avoid being officially labeled an illegal monopoly. In exchange, they'd have to promise to stop the exact things that made them so powerful. The negotiations in 1956 were intense. The DOJ demanded two things. First, blacklisting wrestlers had to stop, immediately. Second, the NWA had to stop blocking other promoters from booking arenas. The government was demanding the NWA tear down the walls around its kingdom and let other people compete. In October 1956, they reached a final agreement: United States versus National Wrestling Alliance. On paper, this was a huge win for the government. The NWA was legally stripped of its most powerful weapons. The consent decree banned them from conspiring to keep promoters out of their territories or from punishing wrestlers for working for someone else. Sam Muchnick had done it. He stared down the federal government and saved the NWA from being completely destroyed. He also, and this is key, avoided anyone having to testify that wrestling was scripted. The wrestling world breathed a huge sigh of relief. The cartel had survived. But as the ink dried on the deal, they had no idea that the very thing that saved them had just planted the seeds for their own destruction. And it contained a loophole so big you could drive a truck through it. With the deal signed, the NWA was legally supposed to change. Officially, the blacklist was gone. Officially, territories weren't exclusive anymore. But in the real world, the NWA had no intention of actually following the rules. The loophole was simple. The consent decree made the NWA's monopoly legally unenforceable, but it couldn't erase the decades of handshake deals the business was built on. The territories still existed through quiet, informal agreements. A promoter in Georgia still wouldn't run a show in Florida, not because of a rule, but because he knew the Florida promoter would find a way to get revenge. The system just went even more underground. Ironically, Sam Muchnick now had to try and get his own guys to follow the deal he made to save them. In a letter to the government, he complained that most NWA members have buried their heads in the sand and were acting like the investigation never happened. He wrote that he had done all in my power for members to abide by the consent judgment. He was the president of an organization he couldn't even control. The fact that the monopoly was still alive was exposed in 1957, when a wrestler named Sonny Myers sued an NWA founder, claiming he'd been blacklisted for trying to promote his own shows. The lawsuit proved that even after the deal with the government, some individual members of the alliance have worked together to prevent the promotion of wrestling matches in the local territory of a fellow alliance member. Myers' lawsuit proved what everyone already knew. The NWA monopoly was hurt, but it was far from dead. The organization was falling apart from the inside, too. While Muchnick was in the hospital, the NWA president at the time, Fred Kohler, actually tried to dissolve the entire organization. Muchnick had to stop him from his hospital bed. The alliance was eating itself alive. For a few years, the DOJ kept an eye on the NWA, but eventually, the government moved on. The crisis was over. On the surface, the NWA had followed the rules, but that was just a mask. The consent decree hadn't killed the beast, it had just weakened its cage. And in doing so, it created the perfect opportunity for new predators to show up. The 1956 consent decree didn't kill the NWA overnight, but it did make it much, much weaker. As one historian said, the real effect of the investigations was that a reformed NWA was no longer an especially effective NWA. Members had less reason to be loyal, and other promoters were way less scared of them. This new weakness led to huge defections. In Minnesota, a promoter named Vern Gagne broke away to form his own company, the AWA. The AWA would become a massive success for 3 decades, all because the NWA no longer had the power to stop him. But the biggest departure, the one that would destroy the NWA, came from the Northeast. The promoter for that territory, Vincent J. McMahon, left the NWA in 1963 to form the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWWF. They were laying the groundwork for a revolution, and this is where the story gets insane. For decades, the NWA territory system survived on tradition. But in the early 1980s, Vincent J. McMahon's son, Vince McMahon, bought the company from his dad. He didn't want a territory, he wanted the entire country. He wanted a global wrestling empire. Vince began his legendary national expansion, breaking the sacred, unwritten rule of the territories. He ran shows in NWA cities, bought up their TV time, and stole their best wrestlers by offering them more money and fame. The NWA promoters were furious. They wanted to fight back, to blacklist the WWF's talent and block them from arenas, all the things they had done for decades to crush their competition. But they couldn't. The 1956 consent decree, the very document Sam Muchnick had negotiated to save the NWA, was now the organization's death warrant. The rules that stopped the NWA from being a monopoly in the 1950s were the same rules that now made it impossible for them to team up and fight Vince McMahon's invasion in the 1980s. Any attempt to stop the WWF would have been a massive violation of their deal with the government. Their hands were legally tied. The law that saved the cartel is the very same thing that let Vince McMahon destroy it. One by one, the territories fell. All their top stars left for the bright lights of the WWF. By the end of the 1980s, the war was over. The powerful empire of the National Wrestling Alliance was completely gone. Its power broken forever. The secret battle Sam Muchnick won against the government in 1956 led to the very public war his organization would lose a generation later. It's a crazy reminder that in wrestling, the biggest fights happen far away from the ring. If you enjoyed this insane piece of wrestling history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments, do you think the NWA territory system could have survived without the government's intervention? Thanks for watching!